What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you. So one that I kind of had on my radar, and it was kind of just because of the name, and fuck it, why not? It just sounded interesting, was the debut full-length from Nicolas Cage Fighter, The Bones That Grow From Pain. This comes out on the 22nd of July on Metal Blade Records. It's been formed in 2012 in Australia. This is their first full-length album. They have one other EP, and, well, alright. You know how there's hardcore infused death metal? Well, this is death metal infused hardcore, and maybe like a little bit of thrash metal and like early metalcore. It's very heavy, it's very breakdown driven, and they got a ridiculous name that gets your attention. Actually, when I saw the name of this band, I was wondering, man, has Nicolas Cage actually played a cage fighter at any point? Because the dude seems like he's played everything else because he puts out like 30 fucking movies a year. Or maybe it's a cage fighter that fights Nicolas Cage, which I don't know what his experience level in cage fighting is, so I don't know how hard of a match that is. But either way, this band got my attention. I jammed a couple of singles, sounded interesting, and this album is, well, pretty interesting. Again, it's hardcore at its base level, but it definitely has elements of death metal, thrash metal, and even some other surprising elements a little bit along the way. But right from the rip, you're gonna get hardcore. Hardcore is, again, that baseline measurement. These guys love big, syncopated, hardcore, chugging grooves and breakdowns. Not necessarily very metalcore-ish, but if I was gonna compare them to a metalcore band, kind of sounds a bit like Earth Crisis, which I have no problem with. Earth Crisis was a big gateway for me into metalcore, like, fucking forever ago. And the first two tracks, Gray Eye and Shrine of Wire, both kind of just embody that. Like, it's very groove laden. There are some up-tempo sections. The vocals are fucking ferocious on here. Lots of fast cadences. And he has one, like, standard delivery, like more of a, just a straight up hardcore growl, but then he'll just drop it down into death metal territory here and there and even throw in some like higher screams every now and then. I like the vocal dynamics. For the most part, he sticks to one, but when he brings in those other deliveries, it kind of spices it up just a little bit. Now, where Gray Eye is maybe just a little bit more straightforward, like a nice, aggressive mid-tempo, which is kind of a pace setter for this because this is mostly mid-tempo, like just good, solid grooves, syncopated breakdowns, you know, like all the fun hardcore tropes, but it does break into faster material a little bit later in the album. But Shrine of Wire, I thought was really interesting, mainly because I wasn't sure if that was what was going on in this album cover here. Either that or this is like a new mask probably for Craig for Slipknot, but that dude hasn't changed his mask in forever, so yeah, never mind I said that. But the song adds some like atmospheric melodies, and atmospheres kind of used minimally in here, but it does help break it up. Like the clean intro to the title track, very somber, very dark, and dark isn't really like the main thing on here. A lot of this is just aggressive and in your face. Like, this is pretty much a giant mosher of an album. This is built for the fucking pit and pretty much designed for people to throw chairs through windows to. But the dark, moody stuff does break it up a little bit. Heretic Vow actually brings in some slightly more blackened elements. There's actually blast beats. It has a more dark, sinister vibe versus the flat out, I'm just gonna body slam you in the pit and hope you survive sort of vibe that is on most of this album. Now, going through this album, it was kind of interesting that the pace and the flow kind of changes towards the back half. The back half, I think, gets a little bit more experimental. They're kind of willing to bring in different elements because a lot of this, again, just kind of rocks a straight up hardcore vibe. When you get down to songs like Static Abyss, the title track on here, and Weeping Sores, you start hearing more of the other elements come in versus it just being a straight up hardcore sort of delivery. Static Abyss has more like death metal tremolo riffs on it. It's a little bit more like brutal, but in like a death metal brutal sense versus a hardcore brutal sense. Even though underneath these tremolo riffs, you have some massive just breakdowns and shit, because I mean, breakdowns are pretty much every fucking second on here. But again, it has more to do with the, you know, elements they bring in outside of hardcore. Weeping Sores, decidedly more thrashy. You get more machine gun guitars. It has a classic sort of like stomp and fucking cymbal grab intro with a, you know, broken down riff. And then it goes pretty much full bore into, again, machine gun guitars, sort of a stomping double time rhythm, almost kind of like bolt thrower-ish, but with thrashy riffs on top. And while there are still breakdowns in that song that are very hardcore oriented, they split them up well. It's not just one breakdown after the other. You actually get some really good different kinds of riffs on there. And when we get down to the last two tracks, it seems like they pull out two tricks that maybe could have been on the album a little bit earlier, because again, this really latches onto that hardcore groove sound pretty much throughout. Even in these songs that have like some different elements to it, a little bit more death metal, a little bit more thrash metal, it's always there. And granted, it's always welcome because it sort of drives the whole album, but it's good to hear them broken up a little bit more. Heretic Vow, honestly one of the most different tracks on here in terms of it being a little bit more dark and sinister again, blast beats, blackened tremolo riffs. This is another one that has more pronounced death metal vocals in spots. Now it does kind of go back to, you know, what they usually do on here, but at the same time, I kind of like that they broke it up a little bit. They let it in a little bit differently. They bring it back towards the end of the song, but they do spend some time playing to their strengths pretty much around the middle of the song. It's still really good, and I like hearing those elements infused, and honestly, they transition really well because there's a lot of good, like, isolated guitars on here where they're sort of leading in the next riff. Dude's fucking shouting whatever the fuck he's shouting just to get you revved up, and then boom, you're into another fucking pit slamming fucking breakdown. And I legit mean slamming, like as in slam. There are some slam breakdowns on Heretic Vow and even Static Abyss. Like, it's just flat out brutal. Some of the heaviest stuff, the vocals get even lower on there. And it's cool because I didn't necessarily expect that. Like, I saw pretty much this was described as a hardcore band with slight death metal elements and thrash metal elements. Definitely got more of the death metal elements than thrash metal, but they're still there. But hearing them go like full on brutal death, maybe arguably deathcore, because I mean, this is hardcore, you can kind of just draw that parallel really easily there. Regardless, I didn't expect them to get that heavy. And another thing that I didn't necessarily expect on this was a tremendous amount of melody, but the last track, A Great Ruinous Deed, is probably the most melodic song on here. There's clean passages, there's great build-ups. It has a very distinctly melodic riff that carries it, and honestly, it's unlike a lot of the riffs on here. In fact, I think the last two tracks in here probably do a little bit more experimenting than a lot of these tracks, because most of the riffs on here are straight up palm-muted chugs, you know, just good hardcore riffs, not very technical at all, but they are bludgeoning, they are heavy, they drive the songs. And that's kind of what matters in hardcore. But hearing them go for some really good, like somber, dark melodies, like maybe bordering on melodic death metal with a hardcore, you know, sort of vibe to it. Actually, you can probably make a lot of comparisons to a lot of like mid-2000s metalcore there. But it's done really well, and I think it adds another dimension in this band. And it was really interesting to listen to this because it does open up very safely. Like, there's definitely a sort of safe house for this band in terms of their sound, and it's definitely rooted around hardcore. And when they experiment, it kind of shows what all they can do, but it's like a teaser, like maybe this is what they push for in the future. Like, do they go more death metal? Do they bring in more thrash metal elements? Are they gonna go like full on melodic? I don't know. I know there's no fucking clean vocals on here, which I thought was really cool because that would probably remind me more of like the metalcore that I don't like. But this album does not bother with any of that shit. This stays very primal, very enraged the entire time. Rarely does it let its foot off the gas, and when it does, it's just generally to, again, isolate a riff and let you know the next breakdown's coming, so duck, run, or get in the pit. And before I get into any like negatives, I have to say I do like the production here. It's very raw. It kind of sounds like an Arthur Risk sort of production. I'm a big fan of his, just in terms of like his, I don't know, bigger sounding modern production. Like, it doesn't necessarily sound like super compressed at all. The guitars have a good old school sort of hardcore sound to them. The drums sound fucking great. Awesome sounding album sonically. In terms of any negatives about this, I think a good chunk of this does play it maybe a little too safe, especially when you hear what they can do and how cleverly they can infuse all these different styles with hardcore, because there's some really good straight up hardcore songs in here. It's just that they sound safe in comparison. Namely Foundation. Foundation is a solid song, but it kind of comes after a really good run of songs with like death metal and thrash metal infused, where this is just a straight up hardcore song, you know, pretty much just driven by one breakdown after the next breakdown. It has all the elements that I like about it, but I feel like I heard it earlier in the album, and I feel like there's definitely more in this band's wheelhouse considering what else I heard in this album. And honestly, I think this album could sort of vary in tempo. Like, this album lays on the groove, and I love groove, but it's a lot of the same similar grooves. Like, you know, the breakdowns are not necessarily the most clever construction, but their impact is felt. Like, they all feel energetic as hell. They all definitely sound pit worthy, but they kind of become repetitive. And There is one song here where I just feel like it's kind of incomplete. Compound Fracture, like it's the shortest song on here, and it just kind of feels like a B-side that's kind of like sandwiched in the middle of the album. Not necessarily a bad song, but at the same time, it's a short song where I thought maybe it would be like kind of the faster, thrashy one because, you know, outside of the blast beats on Heretic Vow and some more like, you know, kind of double time bolt thrower stomps, this album stays pretty much locked in on one particular groove. I could have used like a fast thrashy song on here just because, I mean, they said that thrash is kind of a part of their sound and I do hear like a little bit of it, but if I'm being honest, I don't quite hear enough of it. But that's just me. But honestly, overall, this was pretty good. And honestly, I didn't have any huge expectations other than, you know, like saw one of their single videos and I thought it was pretty good. But I don't know what my expectations are for a band called Nicolas Cage Fighter. You know, I kind of think about like goofy crossover thrash and this isn't that. Or just, you know, weird, ironically named metalcore bands from the mid-2000s. And this is also not that. This is just solid hardcore slash death metal slash kind of thrash metal. I don't know, it's nice and heavy and groovy, and overall, I'm gonna give this 3.5 stars. This was pretty damn good. While they do play it safe on a good chunk of this, their safe zone is admittedly pretty damn good, but it's the experimentation when they get outside of that or just include some really cool elements in their overall sound. Like, I liked hearing a black metal opening into like flat out death metal riffs to hardcore and then a big slam breakdown. That's a fun fucking song. It's called Heretic Vow, and it was probably my favorite one on here. But there were a lot of cool surprises in here I didn't necessarily expect, and this is a debut album. They only have one other EP, so I'd say they're off to a pretty damn good start. I would say if you like flat out groove-oriented metal, like, I mean, if you're a Lamb of God fan and you're looking for something maybe slightly heavier, this might scratch that itch. If you like Hatebreed, but you also, again, want to get into death metal, not a bad idea here, too. Specifically for, like, groove metal and hardcore fans, like, I think this would be a really good gateway into, like, heavier metal because you get to hear these elements in smaller doses versus, like, an entire song. But yeah, this album was flat out fun. I mean, again, riffy, nasty hardcore, loads of groove. It's kind of meat and potatoes, but I was kind of surprised with some of the cool seasoning on here. So yeah, if you are a big fan of anything I said here, definitely check this one out. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. There will also be a link down there at thrallsofmetal.com where you can get one of our kick-ass shirts. As for Denver Death Fest news, at least according to John, we're waiting on something, like a big confirmation possibly, or like another sponsor. I don't know. But we're waiting to get word on that before we make an announcement. But I know we have the lineup booked. I think it's like 30 bands. And for those that don't know, this will take place September 30th through October 2nd in Denver, Colorado, because it's Denver Death Fest, and I make this joke all the time, but there it is. We're looking forward to making an announcement about the lineups, and of course after that, ticket prices. But yeah, this is gonna be a fucking blast. I just have a hunch. So yeah, we hope to see you guys there, and if you see us there, because we'll definitely be there, I mean, it'd be kind of shitty if we weren't, come up to us, say hi, let's have a beer, let's talk about nerdy shit and metal and probably more nerdy shit after that. Let's make some weird but metal as fuck memories together. I think that's the main point here. And of course, as always, thank you all so much for subscribing, liking, following, commenting, all that shit. We absolutely love you guys. You guys keep us driven to keep doing this stuff. Plenty more reviews coming. I think especially this week, there's a lot of releases I kind of want to go over. And yeah, it's got some weird ones. Imperial Triumphant, that one's coming, and I'm gonna listen to it. I don't know what the fuck to expect. I've listened to singles and I'm still confused. It'll be fun, I think. I don't know. It'll be weird. Either way, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you later.